Welcome to today's webinar, Exit Planning Considering a Co-op. I am your moderator, Jenny Alton from the New York Small Business Development Center Central Office. Today's presenters are Rob Brown, Director of Business Ownership Solutions at the Cooperative Development Institute, and Joe Marafino, Loan and Outreach Officer with the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast. This webinar is brought to you by the New York Small Business Development Center, a network of 22 campus-based centers and outreach offices, which are located across New York State, along with a central office based in Albany. The NYSBDC is a U.S. Small Business Administration resource partner. Our free advising, education, and advocacy services are made possible by funding from the SBA, New York State, and our host campuses. So you know, this session is being recorded. We will share it with attendees along with the slides through a follow-up email. Attendees are muted and will not be on camera. If you have questions during the presentation, please don't hesitate to type them in the questions box as they come up. We will address these questions throughout the presentation. For very specific questions, we'll make sure to get you in touch with our presenters. And now I will turn the time over to Rob Brown, who is going to start us out.
Great, thank you, Jenny. Let's see, I'm gonna pull up some slides and we're gonna run through some slides to get some information across, and then we can talk. Again, please ask questions throughout if you would like, and we can stop at any time clarifying or substantive questions. So today's workshop, webinar, this idea of planning for tomorrow, exit planning for business owners generally. So we want to go through some initial considerations that you should take into account, questions that you should be asking yourself, thinking about timelines. We want people to understand the basics around process and options of exit planning for business owners. And we start with this framework around knowing what you want, understanding your options, and then achieving your goals. And then we're going to talk about one option in particular to make sure you understand that, which is the possibility of selling to your workers through a transition to a worker-owned cooperative. So this idea of planning for tomorrow for business owners. As you said, my name is Rob Brown. I'm with the Cooperative Development Institute. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization that was founded in 1994. We're the U.S. Department of Agriculture designated Northeast Center for Cooperative Business Development, and we work across a variety of different sectors of cooperative development, from housing to agriculture, to the work that I do and that we do that we'll be talking about today. And we work throughout the Northeast in New England and New York. Business Ownership Solutions is the program that I run at CDI. We work with existing businesses on transitions to worker cooperatives. This is part of that work that we do, making sure business owners doing good exit planning education for business owners with chambers and economic development groups and trade associations. I don't do, CDI does, but I do not do startup development work. We just do work with existing businesses. These are a few different clients that we've worked with. Joe, do you want to introduce CF&E?
Sure. Thanks, Jenny, and thanks for the SBDC for having us. Really happy to be here. I'm Joe Marafino. I'm a loan officer for the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast. I'm going to come in sort of later in the presentation to talk a little bit about the money side and financing these transactions, but we're a nonprofit loan fund that's been around since 1975. We increasingly are financing these transactions and are excited to continue to do so and make it an option for exiting business owners to make sure that their workers have the capital they need to do these buyouts, or businesses that are growing. So I'll go into further depth in that later. And we also wanted to kind of invite the folks on the call to introduce themselves a little bit in the chat. So as a prompt, maybe people can put into the chat kind of their position in the ecosystem. Are you a business owner who's interested in this idea? Are you an employee who's interested in this idea? Are you a professional who wants to support others? And also, if you have ever actually encountered a employee-owned or worker cooperative business in the world, if you ever bought from them, just for fun, maybe you could name which one of those businesses you've encountered. and seen with your own eyes. So do that freely when you want in the chat, and I'll hand it back to Rob to continue.
Thanks, Joe. Just to set the context for a moment about why this is really important that business owners and service providers think about this and pay some attention to this. Nationally, half of business owners are over 50. The aging baby boomer business owner generation, it's a very large generation. Within that generation, a very large number of business startups occurred decades ago, and now those business owners are getting older and are thinking about retirement, as are all baby boomers. This is on the right-hand side as a graph from the Business Enterprise Institute, surveying when business owners are contemplating exiting their business. And as you'll see, a third are assuming that within 3 years, they're going to exit their business, another quarter or so in 3 to 5 years, and then more in less than 10 years. So all total, within less than a decade, is around 70 to 75% of business owners are thinking they're going to retire. And yet only 15 to 17% have actually developed a plan for their exit. So a lot of business owners are thinking they're going to retire within a few years or several years, but they're not doing what they need to do to understand the process and the options for doing that and developing a plan that makes sense for them and for their business. This leads to a lot of business closures due to owner retirement. That is, in fact, the largest single source of avoidable job loss in the US. We'll get into this more later on, but a lot of business owners think they'll just hire a business broker when the time comes and let them take care of it. But only 20% of business listings ever sell, and only 15% of intergenerational business transfers, family transfers, succeed. And that family transfer success rate is steadily declining, and no reason to think it won't continue to decline. And that is particularly true the smaller and more rural the business, the greater the likelihood of liquidation and closure when an owner retires. So if you don't want that to be the fate of you and your business, you're taking the right first step by learning a little bit about exit planning and your options by attending here today. And then just a few more statistics across some of the states. I live and work in Maine, or I live in Maine and I work throughout the Northeast, but here in Maine, it's even older. We have the oldest population of any state in the country. So about half of business owners in Maine are actually over age 60. And all the statistics are more advanced. In Massachusetts, for every business that sells, 9 liquidate and close. That's from a study by UMass Boston. And in New York, an estimated 3,700 businesses close each year due to owner retirement. So again, if that's not the fate that you want for you and your business, this is the place to be today. This is generally referred to as the silver tsunami. Again, that aging baby boomer business owner demographic big generations, start a lot of businesses, and now that generation is looking to retire. And certainly COVID did not help those statistics. In fact, they accelerated them quite a bit. A lot of business owners who might have been procrastinating before are now getting much more serious and asking a lot of questions and thinking about what an exit plan for them should look like. So the first step in understanding exit planning seems like a basic one, but it really is critical. It's understanding what you want, defining your goals. As the saying goes, as the saying goes, if you don't know where you're going, any road will do. That's the goal. That's the problem here, is a lot of business owners have not clearly articulated what their goals are, what they're hoping to achieve with their own exit plan, either in terms monetary, future of the business, financial goals, etc. So regardless of when you think you're going to exit, whether it's in a few years or in a decade or more, there's reasons to consider an exit strategy now, at least to have as a contingency plan. The first is to think about how you've built a business. Is your goal generating income, or is your goal to build wealth? If you're just looking to started and run a business, or if you have been looking to start and run a business just to provide yourself an annual income, you're going to make different choices about how you grow that business, as opposed to if your goal is building an asset that can fund a retirement plan. You're going to make different choices about how you invest, when you invest, how you're going to grow the business. So that's a first consideration. Just what is your point? What is your goal in even starting or running a business? Important to understand, as I just said, building a business is developing an asset. That business in and of itself has value that you can sell outside of just inventory, real estate, equipment, and so forth. And that leads to the next bullet point, this idea around goodwill. Understanding what goodwill is and how it's valued, how it's measured, and how it's created is really important to understanding the true value of your business. The value of your business is not just inventory, real estate, equipment, and so forth, but it is its track record in generating cash flow. And that in and of itself is the asset that we call goodwill. And if you just liquidate your business, you lose that value. And then lastly, thinking about your employees, remember that employees are an asset. They're not just an expense. And good employees, loyal employees, skilled and talented employees are part of that goodwill. They transfer with that business, and they can really augment the goodwill value of a business if they're well bought into the business. So thinking about exit planning, and again, I want to stress this is introductory, some considerations to take account of, questions to ask yourself. We're not going to help you write your business plan here today in the next hour, but these are things that you should be thinking about as you think about your exit. Factors that often cause failure, as we've defined, lack of proper planning or no plan at all, and that's what we're trying to help people not do here today. Failure to properly identify owners' financial and non-financial objectives and goals. So could be family goals, retirement goals, goals for the business or the employees. Liquidity issues can sometimes be a problem for business owners when they look to sell. It's good to invest in your business, grow product lines, make renovations, and on. But if you take on debt to make a large expansion, you may not have time to realize the return on investment that you need to realize to reduce that debt and for the purposes of business value. So it's good to invest in your business, but if you do it just a few years before retirement and you have a lot of debt hanging on, you could actually owe more than the business is worth, because again, you haven't had time to realize that return on investment in terms of business value. There could be family succession issues, which we'll get into, inadequate successor management. If there's no bench, no team, leadership team who can make decisions, knows how to make decisions and carry on forward, that can be a real problem in transitioning a business. A lot of business owners have a really unrealistic perception of what their business is worth. Some business owners think their business is worth far more than it is. Some think it's worth less than it is. Most of the time, business owners just have no clue at all. And so engaging proper guidance in determining business value is an important step in the process. And lastly, improper deal structure. You could have a plan, you could try to execute the plan, but then the plan itself just had a lot of blind spots, and it could all fall apart after the fact. And you could end up, depending on how the structure was, you could end up owning that business again or losing out on any investment that you had in that business's future. So some of the obstacles to exit planning, again, business owners don't want to think about retirement. There's a sense of mortality and trying to avoid the subject. Business owners are unwilling to relinquish control or develop successors. Again, developing that team, that bench that transfers with the business owner, hopefully with the business, hopefully, that it enhances that goodwill value. A lot of business owners spend too much time working in the business instead of on it. You know, business owners who are running the cash register, doing the books, stocking shelves, doing operational work rather than thinking about how to grow the business over time strategically. The idea of running out of money after exits or unaware of transfer options or the complexity. So in the end, most of these obstacles are emotional and informational rather than practical. Every one of these can be overcome fairly easily by taking these first steps. So some common mistakes around exit planning. Again, that valuation question, business owners just assuming that they know what their business is worth. I own a hardware store. My friend owned a hardware store the next town over, and it sold for $1 million. So my business must be worth $1 million. But that is not how business valuation works. The idea that you're too busy running the company or just thinking that will never happen to you. A lot of these are sort of the procrastinator's excuse. There's plenty of time for that. Or just assuming that your kids will take it over. A lot of business owners just refuse to accept that their kids have said no and just assume they'll change their mind, and then they get cut short. So, oh, I had a slide here and the image won't show. Let's skip over that. So maybe we can stop, and are there any questions that we can answer right now for folks?
No questions so far, but we have
Okay.
had someone share that they are a restaurant owner hoping to sell to a family member in 5 years or less. And so we'd love to have other people share what type of business they're in, so we can know better how to help you in today's webinar.
Great.
Feel free to do that in the chat. It is enabled now.
Great, thanks. So the next step, this idea of knowing your options, assuming you've set your goals and you're clear that those goals are actually you can meet the goals with the exit plan that you're embarking on. The next step is to understand what your options are. And really, all options fall in 3 broad buckets. You're either selling that business to someone outside the family and the firm, or you're selling the business to somebody within your family. It's transferring to somebody within your family, or it's transferring to somebody who's within the company. The only option outside of those is liquidation and closure. So before choosing any strategy, again, define your goals. That's a key takeaway we want people to think about. Think clearly about what you want in an exit plan and in your retirement, and make sure that you have a plan that can actually help you meet that, a plan and a timeline. Understand that the business, selling the business is not the same thing as retiring. For no matter who you sell the business to, a lot of times you may sell the business, you may divest yourself of ownership, but you are still, from a management perspective, expected to stay around, perhaps contractually, for some period of time. So just understand that selling the business does not mean you get to hand over the keys and walk away often. There is some continuing engagement very often. And then somewhat related to that bullet point, just understand the difference between ownership, governance, and management. And as a small business owner, those 3 things probably don't feel like a real distinction. You do it all, you own it, you make all the big decisions, you run the place. It's all wrapped up in the same thing in your mind. But if you're looking to divest yourself, if you're looking to exit the business, you have to approach these 3 things distinctly, and they each have to have their own plan. So, divesting yourself of ownership, as I just said, often does not mean that you're extracting yourself from some management role for some period of time, or perhaps from some governance role where you're still providing some strategic direction or guidance to the firm going forward for some period of time at least. So the idea of an outside sale, it can be the cleanest break, but not always. It can also result in the most proceeds up front, but again, not always. Usually when you're selling to somebody outside the family and the firm, there's no financing you're expecting, or from you anyway, and you're looking to really maximize your sale proceeds up front. But again, not always. And it's not as easy as business owners think. There's lots of stories of hiring business brokers that don't work. There's a real process to determining a business broker that can fit well for you, understands your needs and goals, and can help you achieve them. But it does take time, and it may not work in the end anyway. This is a really important one that I want to stress if you're thinking about selling your business on the open market, so to speak, is this idea about impacts on employees, customers, and vendors. As soon as it becomes known by most, if not all, that you're looking to sell your business, your employees, particularly your best employees, don't know what the future brings. And so they're going to start thinking about their plan B. Same goes for your customers and vendors. If they don't know what the future of the business is and that their source of employment, their source of goods or services, their source of selling goods and services to you is in question, they're going to start developing a plan B. And so that in and of itself requires a very careful management of expectations and perceptions about your plan and your process and your goals. So just understand that impacts on employees, customers, and vendors is a really important piece, particularly for open market sales. And then some options there. I mentioned a couple times the idea of a business broker, because that's where people tend to go to first. But there's, for some businesses, private equity can be a potential option. Oftentimes, particularly for smaller businesses, certain types of businesses, looking to your competition, perhaps friendly competition, is a good place to look. That obviously needs to be handled with care, that sort of approach. But it is often a good choice or a good chance to sell a business. Somebody owns a business much like yours, they probably have the resources and they certainly have the expertise to take on another business, and they may be looking to expand their market. Sometimes there's also possibility of looking up and down the value chain, perhaps from your vendors or from your customers that may value your business enough or be interested in owning a business that they would entertain ownership of the business.
Rob, there's a question in the chat that actually is focused on outside sale that maybe
Sure. Can you hear me?
What's that?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. I'm going to paraphrase it, but it's about selling on the open market and getting feedback from the realtor or business broker that the market has tanked and that it will take time to recover. What would you do in that kind of situation?
Yeah, that's just, I think that's the reality of the market we're at. Financing is not nearly as favorable. There's generally you're going to hold steady and keep running the business, just as a lot of individuals who may have had retirement savings that they were relying on and planning to retire in the next year or so, and perhaps the market tanked for some period of time, and people have to keep working to do that. So I think that is definitely the same dynamic applies there. And you said that person is a business broker. I'd be interested to hear more of their perception of what's going on in the market for buying and selling businesses. But
they've been working with a broker.
Okay, they're a business owner who's been working with a broker. Great.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So family transitions, as I said before, they're becoming less common. I think that just has generational aspects to it. There certainly was a time when young people grew up, they knew that was their lot in life to take over the family business. That sort of dynamic is much less likely today. That's the reality. There certainly is new layers of complexity and emotion involved. It is family. This idea of unintended tax consequences, particularly with family transitions, it's just something to plan for. This doesn't necessarily tank any deal, but it's just something to be careful that there are different and additional tax consequences involved in family transitions that need to be accounted for and planned for. And then lastly, and perhaps the most complicated, is this idea of which family members and in what capacity. If you're a business owner and you have 3 kids and you say, I want you to own the business, like, what does that actually mean? Own it as co-managers, own it in absentia, and they're just profiting from it, but there is a management team in place that continues to run the business and there's no real operational involvement. Is it one family member? Those can be very difficult conversations to have with children. And so that also can lead to a lot of putting off till tomorrow what you should be planning for today. Oop. And then employee transitions, which we'll get into more. There are senior management buyouts, which are common, or perhaps cultivating one employee who could take over the firm. What we're going to talk about today are broad-based employee ownership models, particularly worker-owned cooperatives. There are some potential tax benefits, which we'll get into. And then the idea that employees may know your business best and your customers best, and they rely on the business for their own employment. So there is motivation there often. And so it's worth considering one or more of your employees as a potential transition option for exit planning. And then lastly, this idea of achieve your goals. So if you have clearly articulated your goals and timeline and have a plan that makes sense for meeting those goals and on that timeline, then you have to execute the plan. So this idea of achieving your goals, we don't know what your businesses are or what your plans are, so we can't offer too much guidance in this regard today, but some key factors for success that we can suggest about where to begin. First and foremost, think like a buyer. Think about it like buying a house. You want to look at that house without the current owner there, because you don't want to hear about how their decades of raising their children there and all their emotional attachments to that house. That clouds their perception of value. So just like with buying a house and buying a business, you need to think like a buyer, and you need to be clinical about it and think about the real value and its potential for success and its attractiveness to somebody who doesn't have the attachments to it that you may have from having started it and or run it for any number of years. So that idea of think like a buyer, identify, cultivate, and lock in your key leadership. This is assuming that you have built some key leadership. So, that is a first step, but one way or another, you want to incentivize your key leadership, your leadership team, your management team to stay with the business and to transfer with the business, and to let them know one way or another, materially or otherwise, that they will be taken care of in that process, and it will be a good transition. Because again, that enhances that goodwill value and creates the greatest likelihood of success going forward. You yourself need your own team with various expertise: legal, financial, tax, exit planning, other advisors. There are certified exit planners out there who do embody some of these different skill sets. Oftentimes CPAs or financial advisors are also certified exit planning specialists. So find somebody who can help you through a detailed process. Next bullet point, separating your personal finances from your business finances. Some business owners are great with this. Some are frankly really awful about it. They're running all sorts of personal and family expenses through their business to decrease their taxable income. And that's fine to do, but when it comes time to sell the business, you have made it look far less profitable and therefore devalued your business. And so at some point, you need to create a clean, separate set of books for your business and make sure you maintain them that way. And then lastly, take a long vacation. If you can say, buy my business, it's worth $1 million. I spend a month or 2 months in Florida and I barely get a phone call. That tells a prospective buyer that your business truly is worth what you're hoping it's worth and can be taken over and is not solely reliant on you, your relationships, your skill sets to remain successful into the future. So demonstrating that you can extract yourself from the operation of the business actually demonstrates that it is of greater value because it's not solely reliant on you. And then the last point, we've developed a website that is dedicated to this topic. It is ownershiptransition.org. There is all sorts of information. It's meant to be a one-stop resource site for business owners and service providers to learn about selling your business, family transitions. There's a whole curated section of resources and articles and videos and so forth. on all the different succession options. So this is a great resource for you to check out and learn more in much greater depth about all the different options that are out there, including worker ownership. So that is ownershiptransition.org. So, I'll pause there. Any questions? Because we're going to get into employee ownership here. So I want to stop and create room for anybody who has questions around the exit planning process, options, or anything that's been said so far.
And I wanted to, there was a comment from Christy earlier about a planned family transition to an adult daughter. I wanted to invite Christy to say more about whether they've been able to have a good conversation about that, an inclusive planning process, or whether that's just a hope and dream that the daughter may not even know about, or somewhere in the middle. If Christy has anything they want to say more about that, their experience planning to do that.
Yes, and questions can go in the Q&A box, and you also have chat available to send us a question or information. So look for those to share any comments or questions with us.
Great. I'm just going to keep moving along here then. So understanding employee ownership options is what we want to make sure you understand today. A lot of times when you talk about exit planning and people are like, yeah, I'm going to sell my business, or I think my kids are going to take it over. There tends to be less understanding around the process or options in employee ownership specifically. So we want to make sure that you leave with a good understanding of this option as well. And to start, just that it is an option you should definitely consider. This is a quote from Entrepreneur Magazine, that this could be the buyer that's right under your nose all along, tapping into a pool of ready-made buyers that were right under your nose all along. So it's definitely worth considering this option. And quickly, I would just want to touch on ESOPs, employee stock ownership plans. A lot of times when you do say employee ownership to folks, I say, do you mean an ESOP? And we're going to explain a lot more about what a worker cooperative transition is, but I want to make sure you understand what an ESOP is just to start. So to take a second to explain here, an ESOP, employee stock ownership plan, it is essentially a trust. It is a qualified defined contribution benefit plan invested in the sponsoring employer's stock. So it's kind of like a 401k plan, all in the company's stock. As I said, it's a trust. So the trust buys the company, the shares of the company, and the employees are the beneficiaries of that trust. So it's in some respects using basic trust law. The ESOP can borrow money to buy the shares, so they are leveraged buyouts. And then as they pay down that leverage, they buy more shares until they buy out the company in total. Those shares are allocated to employees. There's some flexibility there with how that is done, perhaps seniority, perhaps a position in the firm. And then the ESOP buys the employee's shares when they retire, when the employee retires. So it truly is fundamentally a retirement plan. It is governed by ERISA law, which is the same federal statute that governs 401ks and all those different retirement savings vehicles. So it is heavily regulated, but there are numerous and substantial tax benefits for both the selling owner and for the ESOP. So that's the attractiveness of ESOPs. But the disadvantage is that despite all the tax advantages, typically it costs somewhere between $75,000 and $150,000 on average to implement the ESOP. And then you're going to spend somewhere around $50,000 a year to maintain it each and every year going forward. So part of that just comes from the heavy regulatory scrutiny from federal and state entities. But that's the fixed cost generally. And I've seen costs typically far more than that, but at base, on average, you're going to spend somewhere around that amount to set up and then maintain. So no matter the tax advantages, there are businesses that are just too small for that to even be feasible. And you're really talking about a size of small business that is larger than most small businesses. Maybe 15 to 20% of the businesses out there are big enough to actually take to absorb these costs and take advantage of the tax benefits that come from it. One other thing I want to point out, because it is fundamentally a retirement plan, and depending on how it's implemented, how the ESOP is implemented in terms of changing ownership culture in the workplace and creating an ownership culture amongst workers who come to own the firm, a lot of times it does not address any sort of management transition plan. So there still needs to be separately a real need to deal with a management transition so that you can fully retire. So that's a bit about ESOPs. I just want to make sure you understood the basics of what they are and why they're attractive, but also why they're often not attractive, or at least not practical. So for all the other businesses out there, what is a feasible option usually is to consider a worker cooperative. And what is a worker cooperative? That is a business. Well, this is the definition of any cooperative. It's an enterprise that's jointly owned and democratically controlled by the people who are members, and that it operates for the benefit of those members. And so when we're talking about a worker cooperative, we're talking about a business that's jointly owned and democratically controlled by the people who work there, and that operates for the benefit of those workers. So just a few basics. Again, this idea that the owner is creating a ready-made market for the business by looking to your employees. Cooperatives, I think this is a key characteristic to understand. Cooperatives are usually, they are corporations, but they're a very different type of corporation than you usually imagine. They're a membership-based corporation. So, when you think of corporation, somebody owns 50%, somebody owns 10%, somebody owns 20%. That's a capital-based corporation. Your ownership interest is based on your capital invested in the business. Whereas with a cooperative, a worker cooperative, it is a membership-based corporation. So that's where this idea of one member, one share, one vote comes from. The workers buy one share, they can only buy one share, and they have one vote in the issues that the bylaws of the corporation say they have a vote in. Unlike ESOPs, workers in a worker cooperative or in a business transitioning to a worker cooperative, the workers buy a share and directly own the business. So ESOPs, there's no investment on the part of the workers. It's with a worker cooperative, this is really a willing buyer, willing seller, eyes wide open transaction, and the workers are buying a share and they do directly own that business. Not all workers have to be owners, and owners have no guarantee of employment. So this is a question I always get, like, what if all my employees don't want to do it? Well, that's fine. They just continue to do their job, and they work for a company that has new owners. But then on the flip side, those who do choose to become owners and to buy into the cooperative and to take over the company, they have no guarantee of employment. All the rules of business still apply. You have to deliver a quality good or service in a competitive marketplace, on time, so on and so forth, right? Bad behavior is not excused simply because you're a member of the cooperative. So not all workers have to participate in taking over the company if they don't want to for various reasons. But again, those that do have no guarantee of employment, because in business, there are no real guarantees, right? And then the material benefit, again, unlike an ESOP where it truly is a retirement plan, in a worker cooperative, the members are getting a share of the annual net income, and that share of the annual net income could be in cash as a distribution, or more often than not, mostly it is in equity in the company. So they build their own equity as workers in the company. There's a few tax advantages. I don't want to overstate this first one. If you thread lots of needles and it's a particular type of company, a C Corp, and it's big enough, there is what's called the 1042 rollover, the IRS 1042 rollover. And so a seller could indefinitely defer capital gains taxes on the proceeds of the sale. So that can be a major advantage by selling to your employees. From the company perspective, the cooperative perspective, worker cooperatives, all cooperatives, exist in a bit of a sweet spot in terms of taxation, where they are by and large pass through for the net income, for the profits. And So that is tax deductible at the corporate level, but they are treated as a C Corp. But the members pay share on that those profits that are passed through to them, just as like in an S Corp. So the members' share of profits are taxed at individual income tax rates, but they're not paying payroll or self-employment tax on that. So that's about a 15% savings. And for now, for the foreseeable future, they're also eligible for the 20% qualified business income deduction that small business owners can take on those business profits that are passed through to them. The IRS does require that a minimum 20% of their portion of the profit share is distributed. A minimum of 20%, that's a floor, not a ceiling, has to be distributed in cash, but the rest, the 80%, can be allocated as equity. So this question around like who's a good candidate for a worker cooperative transition, I would say it's the same business that's a good candidate for anybody to consider buying, which is, what is the track record? Track record of stability, cash flow, leadership, legacy, market, customers, vendors, suppliers, the workforce, right? You're selling track record. This business has operated successfully for X number of years. It's generated a certain amount of healthy profits. If continued forward properly, it should be expected, a new owner should expect to realize those same benefits. And that's what makes any business attractive to any buyer. So just to give you a few examples of different companies that we've worked with, so you can see some different size companies, different sectors, different stories. How are worker cooperative transitions used in exit planning? There's three general things going on here. One is immediate exit, and that could just be lack of planning, as we've talked about today. Other immediate exits could be the death or disability of the primary business owner and manager. Life happens, right? So it could be that a family winds up owning a business that they really don't have a lot to do with because something happened to the primary business owner and manager, and they need to act more quickly to save the business. It could potentially be a bankruptcy situation. So these are all, none of these are desirable. These are not good places to be in, but just to say it is possible to do it in this more immediate exit way. What we're talking about here today, and really encouraging you to think about, is this idea of a phased exit, no matter what your strategy, but to think about it in terms of a phased exit, carefully planned, a structured leadership and management development, a staged transition. I mentioned that idea about ownership, management, and governance. Like, have you properly thought through and sequenced in whatever way makes sense those different transitions? And then lastly, this idea of restructuring for growth. Some of the companies we work with, it's not at all about exit planning. It's about growing the company more sustainably by vesting employees. So mid-stage entrepreneurs who've really grown the company and it's just gotten bigger than like one owner can handle, particularly in terms of like management, perhaps. So vesting employees with an ownership stake and some restructuring of leadership in the company can make both the company grow more sustainably and also make the owner's life personally more sustainable. So a few examples. This is a company in Maine where I live, Liberty Graphics. This is a 4-decade-old t-shirt manufacturing silkscreen company, nationally famous for their environmental ethic and their artwork. Very unique designs, nature-based designs, often, in fact, I think their website is Nature Tees, something like that. But this is sort of on the immediate exit side of phased exit. And this is an example where a business owner just kept talking to their employees about, I would love for this to be a worker cooperative and I would love for you all to own it, but never took any steps, never educated them what that meant or took any steps to make that promise, that offer, a reality. And so really this got rushed a bit more than it should have been if it had just started doing the actual planning or executing of a plan when he first had the idea and started exploring the idea, instead of waiting too far on. But this is, manufacturing, a rural business, about 45 workers. This is a company in New Hampshire, the Home Beautiful. See in the background all the things they sell, really home finishes. So this is sort of the other extreme of careful planning, where the business owner had built a leadership team that really ran the business. He could step in, step out. He spent months at a time in Florida in the winter, on his hunting trips in the fall, and the business really ran itself operationally, day to day, week to week, month to month, without a lot of input from him. So he did the smart thing, which is make sure the business anybody could own this business at that point. And then it became really about the ownership transition, organizing a transaction, developing the cooperative and organizing a transaction, and then working with those employees going forward on sort of the governance level transition. So they weren't just operationally really smart and savvy about how to run this business and be successful, but knew how to think more long-term about how to grow the business, and particularly some financial considerations that were sort of outside of what they had thought about before. And I want to say there's about 20 to 25 employees in this company. This is a company in Maine, also two distinct companies, but obviously really interrelated. One is a coffee roasting, food production, wholesaling, retailing company called Rock City Coffee, and then a large cafe about a block down Main Street in Rockland, Maine. This is another example of just really good, careful planning. This woman who owned this business took about 4 to 5 years. There's no need for it to take that long. She wanted it to take that long. And so these workers, who are mostly young, in their 20s and 30s, a few in their 40s, really can carry this, what became an institution on this Rockland Main Street, forward for generations to come. And there's about 35 to 40 employees here. This is a company in New York, a very small company. There's only about 8 employees, I believe, some give or take. But this is a very small Ace Hardware in Stamford, New York, a very rural, small business. And this sort of embodies all of the lessons to be learned around exit planning. This business was started by the previous owner's parents in the early 60s as a Western Auto. He did not want anything to do with the business. He wanted to be a teacher. So he went off to be a teacher, and then his parents passed away, and he wound up owning the business anyway. So he gave up his career to go back and run what became an Ace Hardware. Tried to sell the business about once a decade, marketing it, business brokers, tried all the different avenues, and it never worked until one day, one of his customers suggested he think about his employees, and he'd never thought about that before. So one thing led to another. We worked with them, and now there's, I want to say 6 or 7 of the employees are now the owners, and he has pretty much extracted himself from the business. I think he still works a bit in the business, a few days a week, but he has stepped away by and large, and this is a nice small Ace Hardware in Stamford, New York. And then at the other end of the spectrum, size-wise, this is Ward Lumber in upstate New York. They have a couple of locations in Jay and Malone, large lumber building materials dealer. This was a 4th generation business owned by the Ward family, and no 5th generation for the business to go on to. And the owner, Jay Ward, really was interested in the idea of securing the legacy of the Ward family and building these businesses, and rewarding his employees who he believed helped build it with him. And so this was a pretty complicated transition. SBDC advisors were involved to help write business plans and do pro formas. And so we worked closely with other advisors here. But again, this is, I want to say around 60 employees, I think 50 to 60 employees. This idea of restructuring for growth, this is one example. Wheeler Insurance, this is in Western Maine. This was a fifth generation insurance brokerage. This company was started before the Civil War by this family, and no sixth generation for the business to go on to when the previous owner took over the firm and became a co-owner with his father and the CEO of the company. He immediately started thinking about, he didn't want to own this company all by himself. And so he started planning for the possibility. An interesting bit here, he and his father, who are the co-owners of the company, elected all the workers to their board of directors of their S Corp for a couple of years to actually learn about what it means to be a board, governance issues, financial oversight, and so forth. And when all went well with that, they actually worked on an ownership transition at that point. He remained the CEO, but as of now, he is no longer the CEO either. So he has cultivated an internal talent to take over as CEO, and now he's just selling insurance. And then another example of this restructuring for growth. This is a landscaping company in the Hudson River Valley in New York. The classic trades example, skilled trades. This woman started this company over the course of however many years, a decade or so, grew to, I want to say, around 15 employees, but really was still acting as, the foreman on every job, the sole point of contact for every customer. It was just unsustainable management-wise. And additionally, the idea of skilled trades, it's very common for your employees to go hang up their own shingle and become your competition. So for the combination of those reasons, there was a desire to expand ownership, vest these employees in ownership, and build on. And today, the founding owner has actually left the company. And so the employees who took ownership and new employees since then are now fully in control of the company, and they're doing wonderful. So those are a few examples. I want to say, I think there's around, I actually don't know how many, I think there's around 20 employees here at Earth Designs Cooperative. So in closing out some of these, this piece, some of the advantages to think about, I think one of the biggest advantages is this idea of the flexibility, the insider-friendly sale. Lots of the clients that I work with, they're really attracted to the idea that they can explore this. They can be really transparent with their employees in exploring it, give them space to explore the idea of forming a cooperative to take over the business. And this can all happen like inside the firm, confidentially. And they can control they can control the narrative and the timing of a worker buyout. And that is really attractive to a lot of business owners. And along those lines, that idea of greater control of process really reduces the risk. They can take their time. They're in no rush. The owners and buyers know a lot about each other's strengths and weaknesses. So, there's less of this cat and mouse game, but when you're trying to sell a business or buy a business, about, bargaining over the unknowns. And depending on the financing, the owner can remain in some form of control until they're paid off. So Joe will talk about this, but all the deals we do have some amount of owner financing as well. So, in exchange for that, we negotiate varying levels of control that the owner may have. That could be staying on as the CEO or general manager for some period of time. It could be a seat on the board, a veto over certain types of decisions, so on and so forth. But that's all up for negotiation. Challenges. There's obviously challenges. There's challenges in every exit plan. But the key challenges here really are this sense of risk or this unfamiliarity. And before today, I'm assuming most folks had little understanding of what a worker cooperative was or how a transition process could work with their employees, how a process works. So all of that unfamiliarity certainly breeds a sense of risk. Certainly with most employees, probably nearly all employees, there are limited financial resources. But that's where Joe comes in, because they're not like mortgaging their houses and pooling their money to buy out the business. There's financing that comes in to buy the business, and then the business pays those loans back. There could also be limited ability or experience, just because a group of workers have very successfully and skillfully shown up and done a great job for many years does not automatically make them a successful business owner. So there is training and mentoring that needs to go on there. It's typical that typical, though not necessarily true, that a longer departure timeline is likely for the seller. It takes a year or so, a year and a half. It could take longer to organize, to do the work, to organize a worker cooperative buyout. And then the idea of differing perceptions of value. Folks who work in your business, work for you, may have perceptions about what the business is worth, or quality of equipment, or there's all these different perceptions about that. And so navigating through all that is kind of the work that I end up doing, helping groups figure that out. I want to go back to this idea and around the three distinct transitions and understanding, particularly in a worker cooperative transition, these become really important to be clear about and to have a plan for each of them. This idea of the ownership transition: who owns it, in what form? You own it, you and your wife own it, you and your husband own it. It's an S corp, whatever it may be, and then it's moving into a different ownership structure with a transaction. So that's frankly like the most straightforward of the three transitions, is a business transaction. This idea of the governance transition: who's making those big picture, medium to long range strategic decisions? That's in a worker cooperative, that's going to be a collaboration between the board of directors and the shareholders and management around the growth or not of the firm. And then three, the management transition: who's making the day-to-day, week-to-week operational decisions? Is there a general manager, a management team? Is everybody's roles clearly articulated with job descriptions, and they've had the proper training and vetting that they need? So you can see the difference between these and the need to take account of them distinctly and have plans for each, and ideally to sequence them in some manner so that you get one thing done and figured out and going before you jump too quickly into the next. And it doesn't matter which order you do these in. We've done them in every which way, but it's just important that you are transparent and have a plan for each. And then at the bottom of the slide, I just want to stress, particularly in a worker cooperative, this is an important distinction, but any company that has an active board, that idea of governance is really answering the what and the why questions. What are we? What is our market? What are our policies? Why are we here? Those are governance level questions. And once those questions get answered, then management answers the how and the when questions. So we frequently always get questions around like, well, who's actually in charge? Who's making the decisions? Well, it depends on what the decision is. And that can be an unsatisfying answer, but that's one way to think about who's making what decisions, the difference between governance and management. And then this is just basic steps. 99% of the time, my engagement starts with outreach from the business owner. They attended a thing like today and they want to talk further. They read something we wrote, whatever it may be. A friend of a friend recommended they get in touch. But there's an exploration period where we'll answer questions, we'll provide some resources. We have a CPA that works with us, so we'll do a financial analysis and an informal evaluation just to have a starting point, make sure we're on the same page. If all looks good, we move into meeting with workers and explain to them, here's what it is, here's the opportunity, here's what it isn't. If those workers want to move forward, they need to organize a steering committee to actually be the group that does all the due diligence and feasibility and works with me and works with an attorney and meets people like Joe to explore financing options. And then at that point, that steering committee will bring that back, the plan back to all the workers to decide, do we want to move forward with this? This makes sense for these reasons, under these circumstances, with this financing. And at that point, they should have an actual business plan and financing plan, incorporation, negotiating terms, and then on through the completion, closing the transaction, finalizing the purchase and sale or stock purchase agreement to actually change the ownership. And then most importantly, I think from our perspective, the post-transaction follow through where we're working with a group of workers ongoing for some number of years around board training, management training, coaching, and so forth. So if we work with a business to get through a transaction, we always continue to work with that business for a few years at least afterwards to make sure that everything moves forward sustainably and they get the support and mentoring and training that they need. So with that, I will stop sharing. And Joe, you can pause for a second to see if there are any questions that people want to ask about anything I've gone over. And Joe's going to offer some examples around finance.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Please put in your in the chat if you have questions or thoughts, that come up, or experiences that you've had that relate. And thanks, Rob. I always learn so much from listening to Rob, and I think I want to just emphasize some of the things I hear from him, that there are different paths. If you can sell it on the open market and that meets your needs, that's great. But in the case of the railroad out of supply company, the owner tried and couldn't sell it on the market. If you have a child who wants to take it over and you can figure that out, that's great. But in the case of Ward Lumber, the children didn't want to take it over. So there sometimes are these opportunities for a sale that's right under your nose of the employees, which can be really an asset that you don't know you have, and this can be a path to meeting the needs that you have. So I'm going to share my screen now. Let's see. All right, does that look good? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the money. I'm a loan officer for a loan fund here in Ithaca. We're one of the pieces of the puzzle. So if a group wants to make this transition, often they'll go to a bank and they'll ask for money, and the bank will be very skeptical of the cooperative model. It'll be unfamiliar. Or and they might even actively discourage the business from exploring it because they don't quite understand it. I don't know if anyone's watching Succession lately, but as Kendall Roy would say, the market is comfortable when there's one true king, and when the bank looks at these things and sees a group of people interested in doing it, it gives anxiety to the banker. So we try to fill that gap in the market by offering financing. We got started in 1975, lending to food co-ops. So the food co-op here in Ithaca, it has like 12,000 members, and if a bank looks at that and says, you want to lend to this group with 12,000 owners, who's really in charge is like a fundamental question they have. A lot of these worker ownership transitions are much smaller, but they still have the question, who's really accountable? Who am I really lending to? And if you say, oh, it's all of us, all 20 of us are accountable. Banks feel confused by that. So there are lots of people in New York State working on this. I want to just lift up some of the folks who are attending. Delia Marks of the Westchester Cooperative Network, downstate. Bobby Severson from the Cornell Cooperative Enterprise Program. Frank Sotera up in Syracuse. So there's a lot of there's experts in New York State that can help you through this, even if it seems like it's a little bit unfamiliar. I had the benefit of being on the employee side of this for a while. I was a worker owner of a bakery for about 10 years. And honestly, it was a great experience. It was to be, 80% of my work was as a baker and 20% was on the finance committee. And I learned so much about the money and about bookkeeping, and here I am, I'm a lender. So it really made a difference in my life to have that kind of transparency in the business. And I think it can be good for the business and also good for individuals in their professional growth. So let's see, here's a little timeline just of the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast's work with worker cooperatives. I don't know if you could see, it's a little bit small, but we've been lending to worker cooperatives that started in the 70s, but in the 2010s, it kind of really started to take off. And since 2014, we have lent to multiple worker cooperatives almost every year, and it's growing. And the stars are the ones that are ownership transitions. So back in the 70s, 80s, the aughts, a lot of them were startups. there's something has changed so that many of our loans are to ownership transition. So we've gotten more familiar with it and gotten better systems. And these tend to be larger loans than startups, and they tend to be in some ways safer loans because the business exists. It has revenue and profit, and compared to a startup, it's in some ways easier to lend to these than to a group of people coming together saying we want to start something. But we also lend to those. And we work closely with Rob Brown and CDI throughout the 7 states in the Northeast. I work in New York, but we have folks in the other states as well. The kind of the two big anxieties that come forth when people are exploring this are, can the employees do it? And do the employees have the money? Do they have the expertise, the know-how, and do they have the money? And often the answer is no on both of those to start with. And so this is where CDI and CFNE come in. It is important to plan maybe a year, maybe up to 5 years in some of the examples, and to get the employees to have the capacity to run the business, just like you would if you were selling to your daughter, to help her understand how to run the business. Because often employees they haven't been tracked for ownership in the past, or for management, or for governance. Similarly, the employees often don't have the money. And so that is the gap that we fill to come in and lend money to a employee group to buy out the business. But when we look at whether they are creditworthy, one thing we can't do if we want to really follow the philosophy of the cooperatives is to credit check them and say, like, does any individual here want to put up their house for the thing? Does any individual, does one of you 20 want to take ultimate responsibility for that? Because that kind of puts a little bit of an awkward situation in the cooperative where even though they say they're working together as a team, one of them fundamentally has more responsibility, and that can kind of poison the relationship between them all if they are thinking that they're an egalitarian group. But we still have to assess risk, and we still follow these kind of 5 C's that you might see in other underwriting projects, but we do it just a little bit differently. So some of them are the same. The business still has to be able to service the debt. So we look for financial projections where they're going to be generating surpluses. They're going to be able to pay us back. The conditions should still be favorable. We like it to be in an industry that's not dying or shrinking, in a place that has a future. That being said, there's a long history of cooperatives fighting against unfavorable conditions, and there are many cooperatives that have come out of unfavorable conditions and been quite successful. Right now, for example, there are a lot of bookstore cooperatives that are getting off the ground. And you would think that this is an unfavorable situation for bookstores, but there are people who want to form groups and run bookstores together. And if they see a future in it, and we see the conditions are favorable enough, we'll support it. There has to be a meaningful capital investment, but we're not necessarily looking for someone to, like Rob said, leverage their house, their car, their personal assets. Often the employees put in a meaningful amount to show that they are committed to it, that when the going gets tough, they're not going to walk away. And that meaningful amount is pooled, and that kind of leverages the loan. So there's a lot of cooperatives in the country that are using the kind of $1,000 buy-in. And to them, that's enough that it's a choice to buy it. Many workers don't have $1,000 right off the bat, but if they say we're going to go through a year process, and we want you during that year to find $1,000 to buy in or save $1,000 to buy in, a lot of workers can do that. They can, and that is enough that when we see them do that, we know they're going to stick with it. If things go wrong, they're going to want to get their $1,000 back. And they're going to fight to make sure that the business thrives and succeeds. We'll also be looking at the character of key management, just like you would in any sort of loan. But in this case, character is not necessarily determined by credit checks. So we're not saying have you paid your credit cards in the past? Are you paying? Is any individual earning credit in that way? We look for the character of the kind of fabric of the cooperative. So Are they making decisions together? Are they having healthy conversations about tough topics? Do they demonstrate a sense of shared responsibility? Some of this is, are they chipping in a little bit of money? Some of it, are they putting some of their time into like having meetings about things, talking about the future? Like, so we test that by listening and showing up. And if a group says, you know, we're ready to do this, but we never meet. We think it'll be fine, but we you know, we avoid talking about hard issues or something. We might notice that and say, well, character seems like it still needs a little bit of development. You know, you should start to, maybe you should find a consultant to help you talk together and figure out, who are we? What do we want? What are our goals? And then collateral is like, you know, still secured by loans to cooperatives. But in almost every case, we're not looking for people to put in personal guarantees. So this sometimes is actually an obstacle. You know, personal guarantees are a way that a lot of businesses get off the ground, but we don't want to collect them because, again, it means an imbalanced sense of accountability to maybe one person compared to the whole of the cooperative. So we look to the assets. We try to be creative, and some of the businesses we went into are under collateralized. And since we're a nonprofit whose mission is to support cooperatives, that's okay with us if other of the categories seem positive and strong. A little bit about the equity and debt before I go into some examples. As I mentioned before, the cooperative members put in an equity contribution. They often set it low enough to be accessible to all workers, but meaningful enough so that they won't walk away when the going gets tough. Usually, you know, if you've got 20 workers, pool in $1,000, you've got $20,000. That is often not enough to buy the business. So it's we try to work to find a way that we can build that capital stack where their equity contribution is one slice. We might have a slice, and then there are other players that I'll mention in a moment. Some worker cooperatives will offer non-voting preferred shares. So this is equity that they offer to the community to buy. They, in this case, don't want to cede control to outsiders because it is not in the cooperative philosophy. And many of them have found that they can successfully find folks who want to buy shares, but who are okay not having control, and they're willing to put in, you know, some thousands of dollars to get things off the ground. I'll mention an example, Real Pickles, in a minute, that had a really successful raise of, you know, like $500,000 in equity share from the community. And the community doesn't have any control. Bread Hive out in Buffalo was successful in doing this and getting preferred shares to get their bakery off the ground. The Drivers Cooperative in New York City recently did a crowdfunding campaign where they offered non-voting equity, and they raised like $1.6 million on the internet of people buying shares that have no control. So it's a little non-intuitive that people are, you know, having these non-voting shares, but there's a solidarity that can help. And some of them deliver a modest dividend, but it's modest usually. And then some cooperatives also will offer to their members to give a loan. So let's say that Rob and I are in a cooperative, and he's rich and I'm not rich, and he says, well, can I have more equity? That might like tilt the balance of the cooperative in an awkward way. So it could be that we both put in the same equity, but he makes a loan to the cooperative and the loan gets paid off, and then we're equal again. It's a way of kind of building patience into the investment, but it doesn't confuse the sense of egalitarianness within the cooperative. Then we offer debt. We're pretty flexible, but we do like to have some collateral and kind of be in that senior position. And then I think, as Rob mentioned earlier, in a lot of these cases, the seller will also offer some financing. So the seller will say, I think, you know, the employees are going to buy it. I believe in them enough that I'm going to give 20% of, I'm going to finance 20% of the sale. They're going to do 10%, and then we'll get someone like CFNE to come in and do 70%. And we really like that. We feel like if the owner believes in the group enough that they're willing to finance it, that's a positive sign that the business can be more successful. So we often seek that and say that means that the owner is going to stick around and support them, or at least give them friendly advice from time to time. to make the business happen. So, so a couple examples. I've just got three of these, and then I'll turn it back over to Rob to kind of open up some Q&A. But here's an example of a landscaping firm. And I think this is a kind of representative of a lot of these deals. There's multiple participants in the stack. The purchase was $450,000. The purchasing group felt that they needed another 185 for working capital to make sure that the transition went well. In some cases, people are trying to replace a line of credit from their bank because the transition means the bank is going to get chilly on them, and they may need to replace that with some extra working capital. So we put in 63% of it. The members put in 11% of it. The seller put in 12% of it, and then they went out to friends and family in the community and they said, "Can you support us in this?" And they found another 14%, almost $100,000 from the community. So it built enough they could buy the business, and they're thriving. They've grown. Their number of workers has increased, and the revenue has increased. The pay has increased. They've been really a kind of wonderful example since 2014 when they transitioned. This is Ward Lumber, which Rob mentioned up in the Adirondacks. Again, this is a much bigger deal. The whole the business purchase was like $3.25 million, and they also needed working capital to make the transition. And we and another lender came in for about half of that. The seller put in 43%, and he stayed on as the general manager for a couple of years. He's still there as a general manager, so he was strong supporter, strong believer. Empire State Development came in and offered $250,000 as a grant to help make it happen. And in this case, the members actually didn't put in anything. So this goes a little bit against what I said before of like, we want to test the members' commitment. Are they putting in at least a little bit? But in this case, because the seller was staying and was going to be inside the business and was like putting a lot at risk, we felt that was enough for us to feel like this was going to be successful. And there are some deals in which the members don't want to put any, the employees don't want to put anything to start. We do try to say, like, what can you do? Can you can you put in $500? Can you put in $1,000? Can you show us that you have something at stake? But some of them are really not in a position to do that, and we try to be creative if we can. This one had a kind of interesting example because the transition was during the pandemic, and they right before the sale, the general manager and owner, thinking in a smart way about the business, bought a huge amount of inventory, knowing that the prices of things were going to be going crazy during the pandemic. And suddenly there were a lot more assets on the books. And so we had to figure that out at the last minute. How does the deal work if suddenly there's another $500,000 of assets? Who's going to take that? So there's always a little dance toward the end as you try to figure out which slice who's going to take. And just as a kind of last example, is another way you can do it. Here's this pickle company in Western Massachusetts, and as I mentioned before, they were able to raise $500,000 in non-voting community investment. The investment gives a modest dividend, and they're a public-facing company. They sell pickles in a lot of grocery stores and food co-ops, and so they had a lot of fans. And they were also able to get a local bank to put up $150,000. We like that. We think it's a positive outcome if the local banks trust cooperatives. So we're happy to have the banks involved. We were involved, and then the members were able to put in $30,000 together to buy the company as well. And they're great. They've also grown and are distributing nationally, and have delicious pickles if you like pickles. So those are just a couple examples. I think in all of these, the kind of thing to think about is that even though the employees don't have a lot of money, they can still leverage loans and supporters to make the buyouts. So I think there's great anxiety about money in everybody. And if you say to the employees, "I'm thinking about selling to you," often the first thing they think is, oh man, I could never afford that, and so it's, if you are thinking about doing this, you might say to them, if you're feeling nervous about where you're going to get the money, there are nonprofits out there that are in support of this. You might have to kick in a little bit, but you certainly don't have to have the $750,000 to buy the pickle company. We can try to find that somewhere else, and you pay it off over time through the success of the business. Just a couple of last things about this, just to say that there are resources out there to decrease the cost of the transactions. The USDA funds rural cooperative development. So I think if you're in a USDA rural area, there can be a decreased cost for feasibility studies. If you're in New York City, there's some money to support and provide technical assistance. SBA, and SBDCs are expected to be able to provide some services through the Main Street Employee Ownership Act, and I think they can do some valuation work. They can do some technical assistance. And a very recent bill, the Micro Business Worker Cooperative Transfer Bill, says that Empire State Development can get involved and offer some low cost or sometimes even forgivable loans to help businesses that are just 5 people or less transfer to worker cooperatives. So there are resources out there to make the cost of the process less, and sometimes to make the cost of the sale less because of that. So if you want to talk more about where the money comes from for these, CFNE is happy to talk to you and throughout New York State or beyond in the Northeast. And maybe I'll stop there and see if there's any questions about the money, and also pass it back over to Rob.
We are currently good on questions, so go ahead, Rob.
Great. So just in closing, I wanted to draw your attention back to the ownershiptransition.org website is a great follow-up resource for you to dig in. On there is a series of 3 kind of DIY videos with interviews with business owners and service providers talking about like what they went through to think about an exit plan. So that's a good educational resource for you to watch those videos and see some stories of business owners and hear advice from service providers. Just in closing, I just want to play you an infomercial of that, and Jenny's going to play that, and then we can take any further questions you may have.
You see it a lot where, a bigger outside company will come in, and then within, 6 months, 75% of the employees are gone, the product's not the same, the service is not the same.
Owners will get to a stage in their life where they, for whatever reason, decide it's time to transition their business. And almost no one does the suggested thing, which is pre-plan your exit when you get in. And like many others, I didn't have an exit strategy and started looking for a solution.
It always surprises me that we end up going with an exit path that sometimes is different than what the business owner originally had for an idea in terms of that exit path.
This is my livelihood. I live here, I work here. So that was the big attraction for me, was keeping the store here, keeping all the people here.
It gets described as a succession planning thing, but I think for me, it was more about the next step in the evolution of the business and not so much an exit strategy.
Thanks, Jenny. And yeah, if you go to that website, you can watch the whole thing. And that's just a short teaser. And with that, happy to take any additional questions or have a conversation with anybody who'd like.
All right, we'll give people just a minute to enter some questions here if they would like to. All right. See, I'm not seeing any questions so far. So we do have someone. So Joe, Delia Marks, who is Delia?
Delia is works for the Westchester Cooperative Network and is doing some of this work also. And I just sent a chat inviting her to introduce herself if she wanted to mention what they're up to.
Sure, Delia, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity to introducing myself. This is actually a newly formed organization in Westchester County that promotes and supports the formation of worker cooperatives, be it as a startup or also as a conversion. So please check our website. It's westchestercooperative.net. And you'll find the information there. We have right now a possibility of a small grant that we are offering for those that are seriously interested. So please check it out. And thank you very much for this opportunity and for this presentation. I found it extremely helpful and interesting. So thank you so much.
Maybe I'll cede a question to you, Rob. Is this since Delia was mentioned Westchester, which has Yonkers, which is now I think the third largest city in New York State behind Buffalo. Is this a urban phenomenon, a rural phenomenon, a little bit of both? Like these transitions, does it happen more in? I mean, Maine is a different place, of course, but do you see it as easier to do in a small town or a big town?
I don't think it's a urban phenomenon, rural phenomenon, suburban phenomenon per se. I will say I think it can be easier to do in rural areas, but probably not for the reason you're imagining. I just think in rural areas there's such a limited buyer pool that you have a lot of time. There tends to be less pressure on the real estate market. Perhaps the question is continue a business, but the business owner owns the real estate as well, and they could probably get a pretty penny, maybe something better than what they could get with the business. So there's just all sorts of factors that could come into play. And I just feel like across the board for a variety of business perspectives, there tends to be less pressure to move quick in more rural areas, or I guess I shouldn't say it as rural areas, but I think in more sort of economically less advantaged areas, right? The same dynamic could easily apply in a more urban area or suburban area. But if it's that hot market kind of question around real estate or business, it could also just depend on the type of business too. There are types of businesses that do sell really easily, and there are those that don't. So it's just, I think it's really nuanced, but I think, yeah, I started to say rural areas. I'd say just like areas generally that are less economically advantaged or less hot markets, so to speak, that there's just less pressure to move quick. And so that is favorable. Time is on your side.
All right. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. We are at time, and so we will wrap things up for the day. Thank you to all of you for joining us. You will receive a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to the recording and a PDF of the slides. We kindly ask you to take a few minutes to give us feedback in the webinar survey that displays after the webinar and is linked in that follow-up email. If you have questions related to this webinar, you can always reply to the follow-up email you receive. Thank you again to Rob and Joe, and fantastic information that you shared today. We are grateful for that, and we wish everyone a wonderful rest of the day.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks all for coming. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you to SBDC and SBA.